Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillahi wa ba'd. Esteemed scholars, teachers, educators, brothers, mothers and sisters. So the topic is the Islamic perspective on mental health. I start off with a reflection of Ibn Hazm rahimahullah. He once was thinking very deeply about the human condition. And he asked himself a question that, what is the one pursuit that unites all of mankind? What is the one issue that is common, irrespective of religion, culture, ethnicity, background, preference, orientation? One thing that every human being is in pursuit of. And after much reflection and thought, he came to the conclusion that it's the desire to conquer anxiety. Every human, to some extent or the other, deals with the challenge of anxiety, of negative emotion. And he says the desire to overcome that is universal. That's the one thing that you could say that is common amongst all humans, irrespective of their age, background, faith, ethnicity, and the like. Because no one likes to worry. No one likes to grieve. And as a result, you want to conquer it. I don't know how interactive a mood you are in today. I won't test it too much. But normally when we do workshops, then you don't only speak, you throw a few thoughts out to people. But the one question we ask when we unpack this particular topic is that, how is it that despite all of the advancement we've made technologically, scientifically, medically, and in every other way, that notwithstanding that, humanity is more in depression now than ever before? That mental health is more of a struggle now than ever before in human history. The reason I bring that up is it perhaps will answer that question. Why is mental health so topical? One of the challenges you face sometimes is people say, why is this now become an issue? Why all of a sudden this topic? Are we not kind of falling into the narrative of others? That all of a sudden now mental health, everything is about mental health. And I do acknowledge that it's become a bit of a crutch for some people. I'll give you a quick anecdote that I'm a manager at Radio Islam. So some years ago, we employed a young sister who was freshly qualified as a journalist. And almost instantly, there were issues between her and her HOD, head of department. So he came to see me and he said that, I'm having a very unique challenge. I said, no, what's the challenge? He said, anytime I ask her why she hasn't done something, she says, don't ask me. It's impacting on my mental health. Eventually, the two of them were not gelling and the issue came. So this was her position, qualified journalist, right? That he mustn't ask me why I didn't do something. He mustn't question me if I didn't write X number of articles for the day or do X number of bulletins for the day, because it impacts on my medical health, on my mental health. Now, very diplomatically, with all the sensitivity that I could muster, I have a naturally loud voice. I dropped the volume, dropped the pitch, and I tried to be as diplomatic as possible. But of course, this is not an acceptable standard in any period of any place of environment, any place of work where you can say that, you know what, just leave me to myself. I'll do what I feel I need to do because I'm qualified. Nobody must ask me anything. It impacts on my mental health. And when I tried to explain this to her, she said, no, stop right there. Because even you telling me this now is going to trigger a mental health collapse. Anyway, after that particular meeting, she didn't come to work for a week. And she sent an email saying that I'm taking a mental health break. So there is that kind of situation that you find yourself in. And as a result, there is a negative perception around these discussions that, you know what, you're just giving people excuses. Students are saying they can't study, mental health. Parents don't want to parent, they say mental health. I don't know if Imam Sahib can say mental health. The other aspect that I want to clarify up front is I'm not a psychologist and I'm not claiming any kind of expertise in this particular topic. I'm just a fellow traveler like you are. Back in the Darul Uloom days, we used to do takrar. So you would sit in the ustad's lesson the entire day, and at night, one student who was brave enough or perhaps foolish enough would open up his mouth and try and redo the lesson amongst his colleagues to just go over it. That's what I'm doing. The presentation will focus around 4 areas. The first aspect is, what does Islam say about mental health? Because that's the key question. We are Muslims after all, right? The second is, what is the history and legacy of Islam in addressing mental health? Is it truly, as many of us assume, a new phenomenon? Something that the modern world has produced? The third and perhaps the most important aspect that I will cover tonight is that how does the Western approach to mental health differ from the Islamic approach? And then the last aspect, the fourth of the 4, is treatments and solutions from the Quran and Sunnah. I'm not going to give you too much of heavy theory, nor am I going to present to you any scientific research or psychological theses as such. My objective is just to help you in the journey to demystify it in your own mind, to be able to understand it, even if it's broadly, and kind of segmentize it within your own mind. I think if we can achieve that for this evening, then inshallah the objective would have been achieved. So what is the Islamic position on mental health? There are 2 extremes here that I want to talk about. I've heard this argument even from scholars, that where in the Sunnah you hear about mental health? Where is it prescribed in the Sunnah that you must go to a psychologist, or you must go to the psychiatrist? Or where did our akabir, who went through so much, our seniors, our forebears, where did we hear them giving talks about mental health or going to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist? They were tortured, they were targeted by imperialist forces, by colonial powers. Where's this? This is all modern day nonsense. So that's, in my humble view, one extreme position. Another extreme position is the secular position, the dominant Western position, that this is purely biological and it can only be treated through modern day therapies and medication, and religion and spirituality is totally sidelined, as if faith has no part to play in this particular aspect. So on the one hand you're saying only faith and nothing else, on the other hand you're saying no, it's purely biological. So here's the important thing. The Islamic position, as is with everything else, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا, is one of moderation. This aspect of mental health is complex, it's multifaceted, it's layered. It's not as clear-cut and as black and white as we sometimes would like to make it, either in terms of the secular position or a bit of an extreme Islamic position. It revolves around the physical, the biological, the emotional, the psychological, the spiritual, and even the metaphysical and supernatural, what we call jinn and jadoo. All of those things combined are factors that you look at in terms of prevention, in terms of causes, and in terms of cures. That's the sequence, right? You first try and prevent something. Prevention is better than cure. And if you can't prevent it, you've got to identify the cause in order to be able to attach to it the appropriate solution. So that's where it comes, that whether you're an educator or an ustad or a hifz class teacher or an imam, I said it lightheartedly up front, but even imams need to be au fait and they need to be aware in terms of this particular discussion and this particular topic. You're dealing with humans after all. I read a book a couple of years ago. The title of the book is called I'm Surrounded by Idiots. But it's got nothing to do about idiots. There's a reason why the author chose that topic or that title, and he mentions it in the foreword. But generally they would do something like that because when you see the title you get interested, right? It's catchy. Because every one of us thinks the people around us are idiots, even if we won't say it. And you would be interested to say, let me read the book. But you know what the book was about? It's about different types of personalities. I found it very interesting. And they have, I don't know if any of you have read it, they basically kind of classify people according to colors, right? For purposes of understanding. So red, green, yellow, and blue. And when you understand personalities, red is your typical loud, confident, macro individual, but attention to detail is lacking. He'll give you an idea tomorrow, he'll be the first to criticize the very idea the next day because he forgot he gave the idea. Green is steady, stable, reliable, but always under the radar, doesn't like to rock the boat, knows what is right but won't push for it because doesn't want to come out of his comfort zone. Yellow is your typical happy-go-lucky person. Nothing is wrong in the world, everything is positive, make a joke out of everything. And blue is that type of person who dots the I's and crosses the T's. And no one person fits squarely into one block. You're a combination. It just depends which color is dominant. So the principle there is the same, that you have to deal with people. That's why this topic is relevant. Sometimes it's like if you had to have a workshop on depression, then people would be reluctant to attend for fear that they would be perceived to be victims of depression merely by attendance. Oh, he attended a depression workshop, meaning he's depressed. So if I attend a Islamic discussion on mental health, it means, hey, I got some mental health issue. No. You don't necessarily have to be a patient. You may be a practitioner without realizing it. And that's why it's relevant to teachers, without me having necessarily have to relate every example to teachers. Whether you're a teacher, whether you're an imam, whether you're a parent. And even for our younger friends who are here, the more you understand about human psychology, the more you understand yourself, firstly. And then you are able to understand others, you are able to better position yourself in relation to others. So that particular book, I'm surrounded by idiots, I was making notes at the back. Firstly about myself, I was trying to figure out what's my color combination. What would you think it is? Well, I would say perhaps a bit of red, more of blue. Definitely not yellow. I'm not that happy-go-lucky type. I'm a very serious individual. So I was making these notes, and then as I was progressing, I started making notes about my wife. What would her color combination be? And this is a very kind of, they know I'm reading books. I got one book next to my bed, and one book at my office at home, and one book in my bag, and one book at my office at the station, because I can't read one book from beginning to end at the same time. Then I got a couple on the phone, Kindle. So no one, took notice until I mentioned it on the radio one day. And this young son of mine went to have a look at the book because he wanted to see how did I classify him in my notes at the back in terms of color combination. But these kind of discussions are for us firstly to understand ourselves and then to be able to understand others that we are dealing with. The more you have understanding, the more you are able to connect better. So, physical, biological, emotional, psychological, spiritual, and metaphysical, but not only one of those. Most of the time it's a combination of things in terms of prevention. So if you want to prevent mental health issues, you can't only say spiritual. Nor can you only say Taoiz, supernatural. Nor can you only say medication or therapy. And if there's a problem, don't automatically attribute it to only one aspect. And in terms of your solution, don't only have a narrow vision that the solution can only be spiritual or the solution can only be biological. Okay? That's the first thing that I wanted to explain. The second thing is that we know the hadith, مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ دَاءً إِلَّا أَنزَلَ لَهُ دَوَاءً. That for every sickness, Allah has sent down a corresponding cure. Whether we've discovered that cure or not is a different matter. Here the ulama write that this is not only in relation to physical ailments, but it's in relation to spiritual ailments and emotional ailments as well. So the Islamic position in short on mental health is that it's not straightforward, it's complex. It's complex and you've got to understand it in its complexity. There are external factors and there are internal factors. External factors would be anxiety, would be depression, would be worry. Right? Internal factors, or rather those are the internal factors. The external factors, sickness. I mean, if you've got a flu, you're not going to be happy on that day. You've got a runny nose, you've got a high temperature. There's nothing wrong internally, there's nothing wrong circumstantially, right? It's not like you've got a boss from hell or a wife from hell or a husband from hell, but it's a physical thing. On that day, it's a physical thing. On another day, maybe somebody told you something. Everything's fine, the food is good, the weather is great, but that one sentence hurt you. And that's now affected your mood on that particular day. So there are external factors and then there are internal factors. And you've got to look at it in combination of those two, together with factors which are beyond your control. At times it may be jinn related. I've done an entire series, I think 2 Ramadans ago, on understanding the concept of jinn and jaddu. I don't want to go there because then we're going to digress too much. But al-waswas is the speciality of the devil. He, in the age of algorithms, let me put it this way, he interferes all the time with your internal algorithms. He's all the time interfering with your inner dialogue. That's his speciality. That's why he's there. The Quran tells us that. So your internal discourse has a lot to do with your mental health, and that's where the devil plays his part. At times it may be even physical in terms of jinn possession and that kind of stuff. So that's the first aspect that I want to touch on in terms of the Islamic position on mental health. The second aspect is, what do we see from the legacy of the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam? Quickly, I'm just going to, because these are well-known incidents, I'm not going to go into too much of detail. Look at the wording of Surah Yusuf. What does Yaqub alayhi salam say? This is a Nabi, son of a Nabi, grandson of a Nabi, father of a Nabi. Ya asafa ala Yusuf. Oh, my grief over Yusuf. My grief. A Nabi is saying, my grief. So what does that tell us? That grief is a natural human phenomenon from which even the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam were not exempt. The year Khadija radiallahu anha and Abu Talib passed away is known amongst the scholars and the historians as Amul Huzn, the year of grief. Why would it be known as Amul Huzn if a Nabi was exempt from grieving, right? Look at Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam's response when the first wahi and revelation came. Zammiluni, zammiluni, dathiruni, dathiruni. What is that? Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam was somewhat perplexed by what had happened, which is again an emotional human reaction. Read the Shan and Nuzul, the cause of revelation for Surah Duha. It's written in the traditions that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam had become sad. Actually, I've heard some scholars use the word depressed, but depression now has become a loaded word, so I don't want to use it in relation to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, but the Nabi of Allah had become sad. Why? Due to worry. What was the worry about? That the revelation has ceased. Is Allah upset with me? Is Allah unhappy with me? Until the revelation came, Ma wadda'aka rabbuka wa ma qala, that Allah is not unhappy with you, Allah has not forsaken you. We look at the time, famous narration when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is holding his son Ibrahim and he's saying, Inna al-ayna tadma. It's natural to cry. Wal qalba yahzan. The heart is grieving. But this is the fundamental difference. Wala naqulu illa ma yarda rabbuna. Even though the tears are flowing and the heart is aching, wa inna bi firaqika ya Ibrahim la mahzunun. That, oh Ibrahim, your departure from this world has grieved us. Notwithstanding that, we stay within the parameters. We don't say anything except that which is pleasing to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, even though we are in that difficult emotional state. There's this hadith, or this dua rather, of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you would find in almost every dua book. And many people know it. Or if you don't know it by heart, you would have heard it. It's not a dua that is unfamiliar. But I want to just pitch it to you from a slightly different lens. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-hammi wal-hazn wa a'udhu bika min al-'ajzi wal-kasl. Famous dua. Now if you look at the words here, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam's du'as are not necessarily for himself. It's to teach the ummah what to ask for on a regular basis. So Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam is saying, oh Allah, I seek your protection from hum. Hum is anxiety, meaning you easily become irritated. You're all the time restless. You're agitated. You're all the time feeling on edge. That's hum. Then he says huzn. That's a deeper state of sorrow where you start wondering that will I ever be happy again? Ajiz, the third, is incapacity, where you feel helpless, you feel useless, you have doubts over your own ability. Kasl. Normally we would translate it as laziness or fatigue, but it's deeper than that. It's a lack of energy, lack of motivation, where even to do small tasks become exhausting and overwhelming. Jubn, we would normally translate it as cowardice, which is not a wrong translation. It's just more to the Arabic word than that. Excessive self-criticism also falls in this particular category. The fear of failure, a state where you constantly debase yourself and undermine yourself, whether it's internally in your own dialogue or whether it is in front of others. Bukhl, we would normally say miserliness, stinginess. That's true, but it also includes self-centeredness, which is a mental health issue, where you consumed. We think self-centered is that person who's arrogant. It is. But it's also that person who's constantly in a state of throwing himself a pity party. Oh, no one likes me. Oh, nothing goes right in my life. You know, all the time looking at the negative. And as a result, you don't care about the welfare of others. Everything's centered around you. He didn't do this for me. He should have done that for me. Then غَلَبَةِ الدَّيْن goes without saying when you're in debt. وَقَهْرِ الرِّجَالِ and when you are subjugated by others. But if you look at the words here, the choice of words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Nabi of Allah is identifying what today's psychologists have identified as mental health issues and is advocating a preventative measure that include this in your daily supplications by asking Allah to protect you from it. So like you would say, oh Allah, protect me from diabetes. Allah, protect me from cancer. Okay? And nobody would think there's anything wrong because cancer is a reality and diabetes is a reality. And we understand that irrespective of how pious you are or how knowledgeable you are, you can be struck by cancer. So making this dua, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam didn't say only the people of weak faith must make this dua. Only the impious, only the ignorant. Every Muslim must make this dua. What does that mean? Every Muslim is vulnerable, like you are to physical ailments, to mental health challenges. And Allah Himself says in the Quran, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا إِذَا مَسَّهُ الشَّرُّ جَزُوعًا. So that's the second aspect. The first aspect of answering this question, what is the Islamic position on mental health, was that what I explained, a balanced position, and that understanding it in its complexity. The second part is the history of it amongst the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam. The final part to unpack this question is that even if you look amongst, in Islamic scholarship, you'll find, I don't want to go into all of the details, Kindi, right? After the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Muslim leaders commissioned people specifically to study the works of the Greeks and others and see what is compatible to Islam in the field of mental health and then to develop it further. So he wrote the book, The Trick to Repelling Sorrows. Balkhi, he gave definitions to depression, anxiety, phobias, obsessive compulsive tendencies long before psychologists came on the scene. In the time of the Abbasids already, in big cities like Baghdad or Damascus or Cairo, you had special units within the hospitals that dealt with mental health. So there's a tradition here, right? That is just some perspective on what is the Islamic position on mental health. And I've touched on that. What is the history and legacy of mental health in Islam? In terms of the examples of Yaqub alayhi salam, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and what I've just given you now, scholarship. Just brief examples. I mean, you can read more on it yourself. Here's where the crux of it is. The difference between the Islamic understanding and the Western approach to mental health. I want to focus on three. The first difference, I've alluded to it already. The Western secular approach is mental health is all biological or circumstantial. So either there's a chemical imbalance in your body which is resulting in acute depression, example, or you lost your job, your wife left you, or somebody passed away that was dear to you, so that's circumstantial and that's having an impact on your mental health. They reduce it to that. Jasad, body only. Whereas here's an important aspect to understand. Mufti Shafi Sahib rahmatullah alayh, in one of his books, has written that what is the definition of a human? How would you define a human? So you could take a very physical approach to it and say, well, okay, a human, and you look at the anatomy of a human, and you say human is got 2 eyes and 2 hands and 2 legs, and you describe it, and that is how we define a human. That would be a correct definition, but again, an incomplete definition, because the day that human dies, would you still attach the same definition to the corpse? Because the eyes are still there, the ears are still there, the hands are still there, the legs are still there. Forget that, you don't even attach the same name. If I die, they won't say, what time we pick you up, Sulaiman? Say, what time we pick up the janazah? What time we're making ghusl of the body? Right? So he says a more complete definition is that a human is a combination of ruh and jasad, body and soul. But the soul is primary because the soul was created first. And the fetus was a lump of flesh until the soul was blown into that lump of flesh. Then it became a living being, even by medical standards, even by legal standards, right? The fetus is considered a living being once the soul is blown into it. And as long as your soul is attached to your body, you are human. You have value, you have worth, you have thoughts, you have opinions, you have relationships. The day that soul is detached from the body, your nikah is terminated. Your control over wealth is terminated. It's no more yours now. You're no longer even referred to by your own name. It's referred to as the body. And it's very quickly deposited into the ground where it will decompose and become part of the earth from which it originated. So, if that logic is as simple for us to understand, then what flows from there should be easy for us to understand. One, not the only reason, one of the reasons that you find so many people today that are depressed and they send them for blood tests and everything's clear. They send them to the psychiatrist and all the balances check out. They ask them, rigorous questioning on the psychologist's couch. Marriage is good, job is good, financial standing is good. What on earth is the problem then? Why are you depressed? Now they've come up with the concept of soul loss, S-O-U-L, where your body is overnourished and your soul is malnourished, creating an internal imbalance. So you're going to the gym and you're pumping the iron and you've got abs, mashallah, that are making the kurta sleeves burst at their seams, and you've got the six-pack. Some of you are blessed with a six-pack, others are blessed with a couple of tires around the waist, but whichever way, you're blessed. But you're feeling hollow inside because physically you're in optimal health. You're cycling, you're running, you're jogging, right? But spiritually you're in a coma. Spiritually you're near dead. Like the body has its nourishment, the soul also has its nourishment. So we spend most of our time and most of our energy and resources in nourishing the body. I worked my whole life to pay off the house, because that's the house is where I put my body, right? That's where my body resides. Most of my big percentage of my money is spent on food, on water, on electricity, on transport, all for the body. So I'm working 8 hours a day for the body. I'm eating how many hours a day for the body? Everything for the body, for the body. How much for the soul? I said this in my Jummah talk. Here's the critical thing. When it comes to the soul, Allah doesn't want quantity, Allah wants quality. You have to work 8 hours a day to earn a paycheck. You don't have to perform salah 8 hours a day. Right? I said in Jummah talk that just before I came here, there was an online Hajj webinar, and I said, Allah made Hajj compulsory only once in a lifetime, because if you do it right, it's enough for your entire lifetime. Only 30 days fast in a year, you do it right, it's enough for the rest of the year. Only 2.5% of specific wealth, you do it right, it's enough to cleanse all of your wealth. So when it comes to the nourishment of the soul, you have a super supplement. Nowadays we're looking for that pill, that all-in-one. You just pop it and everything happens. Take the Ozempic, take the Mounjaro, and then eat what you want. If only life was that simple. But anyway, spiritually Allah doesn't want quantity. Allah wants quality. If you only read 5 times namaz a day, not 1 rakat of tahajjud your whole life, you won't go to Jahannam for that. The tahajjud is a top-up. It has its benefit. So quality is what is required. Now when you overnourish the body and you undernourish the soul, that in many instances is where the problem lies. And that is the difference between the Islamic approach and the secular approach. The secular Western approach is all biological and circumstantial. Islam doesn't deny the biology. Like I said, if you've got cancer, you're not going to be smiling. When you came out of chemo, you're not going to be feeling like you're on top of the world. There is a biological reality. There is a circumstantial reality. If your father just died, you're not throwing a party that evening. But there is this reality as well. Complex, like I explained in the beginning. So that's the first difference between the secular approach and the Islamic approach. You see, the secular approach is about the following. I don't want to get too philosophical on a Friday night. Naturalism. Naturalism, in short, it excludes the spiritual. It focuses only on what can be physically measured, what is tangible. Then they got what they call humanism, which totally excludes the divine. It centers only on human anatomy. Nihilism, which denies higher meaning. Higher meaning is belief in Allah. Hedonism, that the whole objective of life is to achieve pleasure. To pleasure your senses, right? Islam says all of that has a place. Even pleasuring of the senses has a place, but within proportion, within context, and within a framework. The second difference between the secular approach and the Islamic approach is the secular world confuses pleasure with happiness. There's a big difference between pleasure and happiness. Pleasure has got to do with your senses. If I'm feeling thirsty, I do this. It gives me pleasure. 2 minutes later, I'm thirsty again. 2 minutes later, I'm thirsty again. That's pleasure. Happiness is the constant state of internal well-being despite your external circumstances. I've done a separate presentation some years ago on happiness, right? Happiness is not a destination that you arrive at, it's a manner of traveling. So you can find a beggar on the street corner who doesn't have a home, nor a job, but he can be happier than a man who's on the Forbes list who can't sleep at night without popping a pill. It's an inner state of peace and mind. It's not out there, it's in here, right? So that's the second difference, that they confuse pleasure with happiness. Islam makes a distinct difference. The third difference between the secular approach to mental health and the Islamic one is that, and this is, when I came across this, it was just so profound. The secular approach sees pain as a nuisance. The Islamic approach sees pain as an energizer. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam taught us, Salillah al-afiyah. Ask Allah for afiyah. Afiyah has a very comprehensive meaning. In that meaning, encapsulated in that meaning is that you ask Allah for safety, for security, for peace, for happiness, for contentment. All of that is part of afiyah. So in short, when you ask Allah for afiyah, it means you don't ask Allah for difficulty. You don't wait for difficulty. You're not enthusiastic about difficulty. If Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had two options and both were equally permissible, he chose the easy option. You don't show bravado in front of Allah. You show weakness in front of Allah. However, if Allah in His wisdom chooses to afflict you with some degree of pain, and every human being without exception will be afflicted with some category, if not all categories of pain, in some point or the other. That's why Allah says with emphasis, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ, we will definitely test you. بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ. For some it's fear, for some it's hunger, for some your wealth will take a knock, for some you lose people close to you. وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. Everyone is going to experience that, but it depends on your reaction. So the secular approach is, when you experience pain, you must immediately try to eradicate it. Islam doesn't say that's wrong. Islam says that's incomplete. Of course you try to eradicate it. You got a headache, you take a pill. Right? You do what you need to do. However, if Allah still wills for you to be plagued by that difficulty, then you see it as an opportunity to have your sins cleansed, your status increased, and your relationship with Allah strengthened. That's why Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, "Ma yusibul muslimu min nasabin wala wasabin." That no fatigue, no disease, no sorrow, no sadness, no hurt, no distress befalls a Muslim, even the pricking of a thorn, except that if you embrace it correctly, it expiates your sins, increases your stages, and brings you closer to Allah. So the Western secular approach to mental health is purely eradication of pain. Pain is seen as a nuisance. But here's the problem. You can pursue eradication of pain. That is also Islamic. What happens when you don't succeed in eradicating it? That's where the Western approach then is clueless. So you went to the doctor, you went to the specialist, you went to the psychologist, you went to the psychiatrist, you tried everything, then you said, okay, let me go to the Bapu, the Amil, took a Tawiz, still didn't work. Now what? And that's where you find many cases. They've done everything. Now they can't make sense of it. Islam can make sense of it. Listen, you've done everything and cure still not decreed for you at this moment, and that is what Allah wants for you. You may not understand it, but it's in your best interest in the long term. You'll see the benefit of it in the after. مَن يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُصِبْ مِنْهُ. When Allah wants good for you, He afflicts you. Because maybe Allah wants to give you a higher status in Jannah, but your actions won't take you there. So Allah puts you through difficulty and hardship. And when you see your rewards in the year after, there's one hadith that I've mentioned in another talk which I've given about positivity being a superpower. That the person who lived, I'm giving you the summary of the hadith, not the exact wording, the person who lived the most difficult life, if he's just dipped for a second in Jannah and is to be asked after that, what is difficult, he'll say, I don't know. And the flip of that also applies. The person who lived the most pleasurable life, if he's dipped for 1 second, Allah forbid, into Jahannam, he won't know what's pleasure. So that's where Islam gives you the greater perspective, the greater context, right? The other aspect that I want to speak on in terms of the differences between the Islamic understanding and the Western approach is this element of if Allah is pleased with you, then you'll be happy. And if Allah is not pleased with you, you'll never be happy. Let me qualify that. It doesn't mean anyone who's got some period of sadness or depression or anxiety means Allah is displeased with them. It means in the end, ultimately, if you have the help of Allah, Allah will help you to be able to navigate. And no matter what you have at your disposal, in terms of means, in terms of medication, if you are living a life of sin, you'll never be happy. That's why you find those people, he owns a fleet of private jets, he's got a private island, all the women are throwing themselves at his feet, there's nothing he wants for, but he can't sleep at night, he's suicidal. Because true happiness only comes from Allah. That's where you need to find it. So I qualify it further, and this is an important qualification, understand this. Because within our community, and at times even some scholars, would say, what is this depression? Read namaz, read Quran, make dhikr, strengthen your relationship with Allah. Then you won't need no therapy, and you won't need no medication, and you won't even need this discussion. It's not an incorrect answer. Again, it's an incomplete answer. Of course you need salah. Of course, in moments of difficulty, you turn more to salah and more to Quran and more to dhikr. But how do you understand spiritual health, meaning a strong relationship with Allah in relation to your mental health? Understand it like this. From the time we were young, what did our parents tell us? Eat your veggies. Don't eat too many sweet things. Good health, good physical health. Right? Good diet. So a good diet is the foundation of good physical health. With me. But it doesn't mean that if you have a good diet that you won't have physical ailments. You see that sometimes. There's a rule and then there's an exception to the rule. So you find the man who is in supreme fitness. Right? He's got the six-pack, he's got the abs, he's running every day, he's counting calories, he's always in a calorie deficit. He's got his watch, he knows his heart rate, he knows his pulse rate, everything. Age of 38 on the pedal cord, has a heart attack and gone, dead. Then you got another baji. He eats all the tarkaris and the ghee and the samosas and the oil and the bhajiyas, and he's a chain smoker. He walks nowhere. He's got a nice pot belly and he lives till 80. Now, him living till 80, is that an argument to say that good diet is not important? Or that man dying in optimal health at 38, is there an argument to say that good diet is not important? No. Good diet means you give yourself the best chance of preventing physical issues. And if physical issues do arise, a person who's physically healthy has got a stronger chance of overcoming cancer than a person who's physically unhealthy. It doesn't mean it don't happen. It means if it happens, you give yourself the best chance. Similarly, your relationship with Allah being strong is like a good diet. It doesn't mean you won't have mental health issues or you won't have emotional issues. It means it's the best preventative measure, and if it happens, it's the best tool to overcome it and to prevail over it. So yes, you must tell people perform salah and make Quran and make dhikr. That's not wrong, it's incomplete. Sometimes you don't understand what we're saying. When we say no, you only have to read salah, it means that a pious person can never be depressed. And if a person is depressed, then he's not pious. And that's wrong. Ya asafa ala Yusuf is our understanding of that. We go now to the fourth aspect, right? And that is treatment and solutions from the Quran and Sunnah. I'm going to share with you 10 very quickly, right? And I'm not going to open the next slide because then you're going to see it listed there and you're not going to pay attention to what I say. That's why you see my slides are by design intentionally very broad. It's just meant to help you follow the segments. I don't put all the information there because what happens is just take out the phone, take a picture of the slide, and you will 99.9% guaranteed never look back at those pictures. So it gives you an excuse to switch off. First problem. Second problem is you're not listening to what I'm saying. You're reading what's on the slide. So that's my preference. Other people will have other preferences. When I'm an attendee, I like to see everything because I can do exactly that. That play on my phone for the rest of the presentation. The first and most important part of the treatment and solution, in case you misunderstood what I've said so far, is develop your spirituality. But understand it in the context of what I've just explained. It's like a good diet. So when something happens and you go to hospital and they give you a stent and they do everything, the doctor says, now, walk every day by. Cut down. Air-fried samosas now, not that oil-fried samosas. Your Maulana will tell you, he comes to visit me in London when I'm there in Ramadan, that masjid there where I am in Ilford, they give you the kajur dipped in ghee. It's very tasty, but it's not good for the diet. So, develop your spirituality because even today psychologists say the immune system functions better when you accept that certain things are beyond your control and they are in the control of a divine being, of a greater being, right? Now there's some aspects pertaining to the first treatment, and this is spirituality. The one is dua. Dua is great psychotherapy. See, you don't sometimes have to ask Allah directly for what you need. Dua is a conversation with Allah. Umar radiallahu anhu used to say, when I make dua, it's of secondary concern to me whether I get what I'm asking for or not. My main objective is to have a conversation with Allah. Munajat, laddat al-munajat. Okay? So the famous dua which Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam taught for depression, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Allahumma inni abduk wa ibnu abdik. If you look at that whole dua, its translation, nowhere there is their direct request. But what is mentioned in the dua, أن تجعل القرآن ربيع قلبي. That let the Quran be the springtime of my heart. So sometimes dua is not only about what you're asking or not asking, it's about connecting with Allah. It's about connecting with Allah. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is salah. You see, salah allows the body to remain on earth, but for the soul to transcend the earth. As-salatu mi'rajul mu'min. We made up of the two. The soul was not created on earth, remember that. And the soul will not remain on earth. The soul is what continues into barzakh and from there into akhirah. So you need that connectivity with the divine in order to be able to nourish your soul. And salah is the primary source of that. Secondly, when you do have to deal with the rough and tumble, the ups and downs of life, arihna bis salati ya Bilal. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, oh Bilal, bring comfort to our eyes through prayer. So that's salah, right? The third aspect of developing your spirituality, the first solution, is dhikr. Now sometimes people think, what is this? The Maulvi is going on about dhikr, dhikr, dhikr. Dhikr is not just chanting. If I sway you, if I insult you, and that spoils your mood for the rest of the day, did I hit you? No. Did I touch you? No. My words affected you. So why can't the words of remembering Allah affect you positively? Common sense, logic. Exactly how it happens, leave that to Allah. You don't have to know everything, in every detail. Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub. In the remembrance of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, you would find solace of heart. The next aspect of still the first one, developing spirituality, is have expectations in Allah alone. This is a big problem in life. When you hinge your expectations, especially on those closest to you, you're setting up yourself for great depression. No, my son, he's going to look after me. So I spend every cent on his education. The mother is making samosas, bhajiyas and pies and selling, making him a doctor. Then he becomes a doctor, mashallah. And after he gets married, he becomes garjamai. Now the mother's whole life is in tatters. I was a single mother. I broke my back to break him up, my only son. And I thought, he's going to look after me. Now what happened? He's looking after the mother-in-law. To feel sad about something like that is realistic. I'm just giving one example. There are many other examples. I mean, sometimes the son will come and say, Maulana, my parents stay with me. But yet, my other brother is the favorite. Everything for him and his children. So you have to correct your niyyah. Why am I doing it? Lillah, for Allah. Yes, inna Allah la yudhi'u ajra al-muhsinin. Allah will never let my rewards go to waste. If I spend my whole life educating my son, even if he became garjama, it's going to hurt me, but it don't break me. It will hurt me, but it don't break me, because my reward of doing what I did for my son is with Allah. My reward of doing what I did for my father is with Allah. But don't place your reliance, don't have hopes in others, especially those closest to you. See, if one fellow musalli in the masjid disappoints you, it will irritate you for a day and it's over. When your son disappoints you, it will break you. If you had expectation in your son or you had expectation in your parent. So have expectations in Allah alone. Have expectations in Allah alone. The third aspect is that have confidence in Allah. Be optimistic. See, Yaqub alayhi salam, as much as we talk about Ya Asafa ala Yusuf, that he had grief, there's also the other aspect. The grief of Yusuf was so intense that he lost his eyesight. Then he loses his next favorite son, Binyamin. And then Yehuda has to stay behind because of the issue with Binyamin being arrested for theft, right? So 3 sons gone. What does he say? Asallahu ay ya'tiyani bihim jami'a. I have hope Allah will bring all 3 of my sons back to me. Even though his own sons are telling him, Innaka lafi dalalika al-qadim. You're going on about this Yusuf for how long now? Make peace with it. Asallahu ay ya'tiyani bihim jami'a. Always have hope in the greatness of Allah. So that's the first aspect. Now I'll open up the slide. So develop your spirituality. How? Through sabr, through dua, through salah, through dhikr, having expectations in Allah alone, and practicing optimism. Sabr is something that, we translate again in a very incomplete way as only patience. But it's more than that. It's about perseverance. Persevere means you keep at it. You keep at it, right? Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah has said that there's 3 elements to sabr. Restraint, holding back from impulsive reactions. 2, strength, meaning pushing through difficulties or bearing difficulties with dignity. You see people who go through difficulty with dignity, and you see people who go through difficulty otherwise. And the third is using trials as an opportunity to stimulate growth. This is what I was talking about earlier on. It's part of sabr, to use trials and hardships in your life to grow. I always give this example of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, everyone knows him because we carry his device, right? Let's not go into the whole debate about Meta and Apple and monopoly of the digital world. That's a different matter. But Steve Jobs was the founder of Apple. He was at the same time the CEO and the chairman of Apple. I've read the article of one of his close assistants at the time, that period, before Apple became famous throughout the world, when it was only an American product. And he explains in this article, I can't remember the gentleman's name, what happened is there was a clash of vision between Steve Jobs and the rest of the board. And the board conspired and they fired him. Even though he was the founder and he was the CEO, he was the visionary, it was all his baby. They fired him. Then he went and did his own thing, and later on they rehired him. But Steve Jobs said, toward the end of his life, had they not fired me, I would have not reassessed how I was doing things and come back stronger, and Apple would not have enjoyed the success that it enjoys today if they didn't fire me back then. So that's part of sabr, where you use difficulties as an opportunity to grow, to come back stronger. There's one talk that I've given on the benefits of failure. Sounds like a contradiction in terms, or like an oxymoron. And there's a phrase that I used that, when I gave the talk, that if you can understand failure, you can understand what is failure. Failure is only when you give up. Until then, you haven't failed. If you can understand that, then you can fail your way to success. Because we're all sitting under the light. It took Edison 1,000 plus attempts before he got it right. So he never really failed, because he never gave up. In Einstein's report, it was written that he is a slow student with minimal prospects of academic success. And the rest, as they say, is history. So if you understand failure, you will understand you never truly fail until you give up. It's just success postponed when it doesn't happen the first time around, the way you want it to happen. There was an article I read, a divorced lady said, amazing. It's just about mindset. Even the Jummah talk I was saying, it's what will make this Ramadan better than any other Ramadan in your life prior to this is a change in mindset. Otherwise, everything else is going to be the same. You're not going to fast 35 days or read 35 rakats of Taraweeh Salah. Everything else is the same, but that mindset shift. So look at her words. She said, I refuse to refer to my first marriage as a failed marriage because it was Allah's way of training me to be a better spouse in my second marriage. Now, we won't ask Allah for a first failed marriage. We say, oh, Allah, train us such that we only have to attempt it once. But Allah knows us better than we know ourselves. So some of us have to go through 1, 2, 3, 4 attempts before you get it right? So that's sabr. One other aspect, right, that's important. All of that is under developing spirituality. Now we go very quickly. Spiritual environment. Invest in your family. It's more important to invest in your family than to invest for your family. Most of us are investing for our families, but we're not investing in our families. The wealth will go, but the time you spent with them. And again, Allah doesn't want quantity. You can't say, I worked for 8 hours, I must sit with the wife for 8 hours. You maybe need to sit with her for 10 minutes, but it must be 10 quality minutes. Like really quality minutes. Otherwise then, if she wants to make you laugh, she can't tell you the joke, she must WhatsApp you the joke. I always give that example of my friend who's a couch potato, right? So he says, Shaykh, me, when I come home, I just slouch on the couch. And if I'm feeling thirsty, I say, water! And 3 glasses come, one from the son, one from the daughter, and one from the wife. He say, but Shaykh, these days I make water. Wife is on Instagram. Daughter is on TikTok. The son, in South Africa, we say the lighty. The lighty is on Xbox. So I thought, no man, my screaming is not penetrating. They're not hearing me. So now I change my tactics. I go onto the family WhatsApp group, I say water, and 3 glasses come. Come now, how many of you're staying in the same house and you've WhatsApped your kids or your parents in the other room? It's how the world operates nowadays. Social environment is important. Because happiness is contagious, but sadness is also contagious. If you're all the time surrounding yourself with what we call back in South Africa the grumpy chachas, then you'll also become grumpy. But if you surround yourself with people who are generally positive, not unrealistically positive, right? Then positivity is also contagious. There's the aspect of diet. Now we may think, what's this got to do with mental health? See the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the Nabi of Allah, Aisha radiallahu anha, used to send talbina to the house of the bereaved families. The Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to say, this is a good dish because the ingredients of it stimulates emotional healing. It stimulates emotional healing. Adopt an attitude of gratitude. The glass always half full. Unduru ila man huwa asfala minkum. The hadith tells us, look at those, in material things, look at those who have less. Otherwise you'll never ever be in a state of contentment. Why is it that those on the Forbes list work the most hours? I can't imagine. I think, man, if I got 1/10 of their wealth, I'll retire for the rest of my life. Because the guy at number 2 wants to be number 1. And the one who's number 1 wants to stay number 1. Elon Musk works crazy hours. It sucks you in. It sucks you in, and then it's just a repetitive cycle. So you've got to understand that gratitude, spiritual matters, you look at those who are doing more. Brings you closer to Allah. It keeps you energetic. But in material matters, like Shaykh Sadi said, I came to the masjid to complain to Allah. It's a hot day, I got no shoes, my feet are burning. And as I walked into the masjid, I found a man crawling who had no legs. So what do I have to complain about? Gives you perspective. Look at those who have less. It gives you perspective. Otherwise, you're going to trivialize the bounties of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Make others happy. The best way for you to stay in optimal mental health is to make others happy. To do for others, but not comparing with others. The biggest problem today is not social media. Social media is a neutral tool. It's how we consume social media and how we use social media. When you overconsume something, anything, right? Even good food. I was reading the other day, because we're all fighting the battle of the bulge in some way or the other, that even fruit, which is generally healthy, you overconsume is not good for various aspects of your physical health. So overconsumption of anything as a general rule is not good. Even nafil ibadat, overdoing it, is discouraged. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam told Abdullah bin Amr bin As radiallahu anhu, and later on in his life he regretted that I should have heeded that call much earlier. You don't overdo it, because your nafs will rebel. So the aspect of comparing yourself with others, social media now shows you the best 5% of everybody else's life, but doesn't show you the other 95%. So you're constantly looking and thinking, that's my life, only to find out that those influencers then get divorced. They come across as the most romantic couples, so in love. They're on perpetual holiday. There was a time, I'm talking about South Africa, if we went from Joburgers, because Joburg is the economic heartland of South Africa, there's no natural beauty there, there's no water there. Mashaykh were there recently, they'll tell you. So if we went from Joburg to Durban, that was a lovely holiday. Now, if I tell my children we're going to Durban, that one has gone Dubai, that one's gone Malaysia, that one's gone Seychelles, Maldives. Why? How? How you know? Status. What's some status? So you're over-consuming. And then we also, those who are privileged, are oversharing. I feel that there are certain boundaries of Allah you must not even disclose to your parents, not even to your children, not even to your brothers. What happened between Yusuf alayhi salam and his brothers? What was the root of it? Jealousy. Jealousy, right? So keep it to yourself. Learn to zip your mouth and learn to restrain your thumb. Post everything. Now you go for holiday, you're giving running commentary on your WhatsApp status. Today you're skydiving, tomorrow you're scuba diving. Your wife is putting commentary on her Instagram stories. And who's watching? Your cousin who can't pay rent. Then you say, hey, Mauli Sahab, Najar. Need tawiz. This is like this obsession now. You go, your wife made a nice meal, or you go for a nice meal. Ah, no, hold on. Not Bismillah wa barakatillah first. Picture, put it up. See what we ate. Next day, running stomach. Al-aynu haqqun. Not everybody who's looking is looking with a negative intention, but that effect is a reality. Now on my WhatsApp picture, I must show how beautiful my wife is also. I can't only put a picture of myself. I must put a picture of my wife. Even if she is not unfaithful to you or you're not unfaithful to her, it's unnecessary disclosure. It's oversharing. So stop oversharing, others won't be comparing to you. And stop over-consuming, then you won't compare yourself to others. That's also a factor when it comes to mental health. Then forgive others. Otherwise, you're walking with a permanent thorn in your shoe. Forgive for your own sake. You feel lighter, you feel happier, and you get rewarded if you forgive for the pleasure of Allah. Whether they appreciate or not, that's a separate matter. It's a bonus if they appreciate. Forgive for the pleasure of Allah and for your own sanity. Choose your friends and your company properly, like I explained, because it is contagious. Don't fret or fear failure. You don't go and fail by design. You don't be reckless. But if you failed in the past, don't fret over it. And don't over-obsess over possible future failure. Live in the present. Deal with what you have under your control. وَمَن يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. And that brings me to the last aspect. See, in Arabic they have a nice saying. They say, رُبَّ عِلَّةٍ كَانَتْ سَبَبُ الصِّحَّةِ. That sometimes you have to get sick in order to be healthy. Simple example, maybe you're not living a healthy lifestyle. You're chowing all those samosas and bhajjas and kebabs, and you're not running and you're not walking and you're very sedentary and all of that. Then you have a heart attack and you get one hell of a shock. Now after that heart attack, you go on a diet, you lose weight, you start cycling, playing paddle, you're walking every day to the masjid, you're not driving, you're watching your calories, you're watching you eat. Now you say, hey, I've reached a stage where I'm more physically healthy than I was ever before in my life. That sickness became the catalyst for you now gaining optimal health. So even mentally and emotionally, sometimes you've got to hit rock bottom in order to be able to soar, in order to be able to reach new heights. You have to be fired from the company that you started to be able to come back and take it to a point where the man is long dead and we're still talking about him. We're still talking about him. Just before I conclude, let me share with you another anecdote. Not really related to this topic, but it's in my mind, so I'll share it. The same Steve Jobs, right? He was born to Muslim parents. He was born to Muslim parents. His father was Arab. They gave him up for adoption. Then he grew up following the faith of his adoptive parents. And he and his biological father met on more than one occasion, but they didn't know at that stage. And eventually when he discovered he wanted nothing to do with his biological father, that man must have been regretting when he saw the bank balance. But anyway. So his adopted father told him one day that paint the fence. So he took the roller, dipped it in the paint, and he painted the fence. And his father came home in the evening and said that, did you paint the fence? He said, yeah. The father went and saw that he painted the surface, but he didn't paint the grooves inside. So the father asked him that, why don't you paint the grooves inside? So he said, look, when whoever walks past our house, whoever drives past the house, they just see the surface of the fence. Who worries about the grooves? Who can see the grooves? So his father said, we can see it. If we can see it, it matters. When they brought to him the first Macintosh, long before iPod, iPad, iPhone, right? The MacBook, that first stint, before he got fired. When they brought it to him, when the technicians brought it to him like this, in the form of a fully, a manufactured laptop, he said, open it up. They said, why? He said, I want to see the inside. He said, what's the point of seeing the inside? It's about the outside. He said, open it up. So they opened it up. He said, the inside is not as beautiful as the outside. When you make the inside as beautiful as the outside, then we'll launch it. They said, but who looks at the inside? Who can see it? He said, we can see it. We can see it. There are a lot of lessons you can learn from that anecdote. That one father could have turned out as Steve Jobs, who was a Muslim. But then you see this father here, obviously he fell short in terms of the correct faith, but he taught him some noble lessons, which held him in good stead later on in life. That if we can see it, it matters, even if others can't see it. So I just shared with you in passing. Let me leave you with this. See, I started off by saying that I'm not a professional. This is not my field of expertise. I didn't study psychology. I don't have a degree in psychology. I don't have a degree in psychiatry. But just in case you may wonder that whether I just came here and did Rajman bil Ghaib, this whole process of me studying a little bit on this topic of Islamic health started when it's what they call in South Africa the Islamic Medical Association. So that's like an umbrella body of the doctors. So when they have the annual conference, then they ask ulama to come and speak on specific topics. And they asked me to speak on the Islamic perspective on mental health. And I was fairly nervous and anxious, mental health issues, because not that I have a fear of public speaking, but to speak to a room of professionals on the topic which is not up your alley, technically speaking, is not the easiest thing to do. So I read a couple of books and I read articles and I had to work it out in my own mind first. When people ask you what's the secret to public speaking, half of it is working it out in your own mind. Once you can work it out in your own mind, you're able to structure it then. If you're still confused about something, never speak about it. Unless you're asking or you're engaging as a process of further learning. So I presented this to a seminar full of doctors and they gave it the thumbs up. So I don't think there's anything wrong biologically or medically or psychologically. And Islamically, alhamdulillah, many ulama have and will give input. So, but I'm not a professional and I'm open to engagement on any of these aspects, right? You may see things differently, and if you do, I mean, by all means, we're all here to learn. So that just as a concluding point. The other thing is that we all have to appreciate each other's roles, and I mentioned this at that what you call it, at that seminar, right? That see, doctors have their part to play, psychologists have their part to play, but ulama also have their part to play. And why do I say that? Because coming right back to the beginning, it's a multifaceted thing. It covers the biological, it covers the psychological, but it also covers the spiritual, and it also covers the metaphysical and the supernatural. So we cannot be competing. The doctors can't be saying, hey, what you always want to do on this turf here, this is our domain. And we can't say, hey, what you know about this is our turf. We all have our part to play, and if we play it in tandem, then we can deal with the issue, rather than trying to exclude each other. And the last thought is that Islam is not therapy, Islam is submission. Islam is not therapy, Islam is submission. But when you submit to the teachings of Islam, then that submission in itself becomes therapeutic. Let me say that again as the closing remark, that Islam is not therapy. Islam is submission. But when you submit to the teachings of Islam, then that submission itself becomes therapeutic. May Allah Ta'ala grant us all the understanding. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. I don't know if you have any questions. I normally say, if you have no questions, it means one of two things. It either means you understood everything or you understood nothing. But if you do have questions, and relating to what I said, like not the deeper science of psychology or psychiatry, because that's not my area of expertise.
No questions? Nothing from online? Okay, Jazakumullah. We have a question here.
Let's go through those definitions again. Let me find the page. I'll find it for you now in a second, no stress. So ham is translated as anxiety, but it's more than that. It's about being easily irritated, restless, agitated, right? You find no calm. Huzn, translated as sorrow, but it's deep sadness, where you start wondering will I ever be happy again. Ajiz, translated as incapacity, but it's a deeper sense of helplessness, where you doubt that things will ever improve. Kasal, we would say laziness, but it's sluggishness, lack of energy, where even small tasks you don't want to begin or they feel overwhelming and exhausting. Jubn, cowardice, but beyond that, self-criticism, a fear of failure, constantly undermining yourself. Bukhl, miserliness and self-centeredness, but also being consumed by self-pity and neglecting the welfare of others and drowning in your own gloom. And Ghalabat dain is being crushed by the weight of debt, and Qahr rijal, being subjugated by others, which then obviously impacts on your mental health. Internal well-being. External circumstances. No in-swingers, out-swingers, curveball. No, it's a good question. And look, every circumstance would have its own dynamics, right? But if I were to give a kind of broad answer, the one is what I said earlier on. The reason I mentioned that book about I'm surrounded by idiots is that somewhere else after that I read where one alim said, every alim must learn the psychology of personalities. because you're dealing with personalities, right? So that's the first thing I would say, that every imam is now kind of, and like in yourself, you're the head of an institution, you have to understand personalities, the science of personalities, to be able to deal. Some people need a stern talking to, then nothing else will work. And others need a different kind of approach. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we mustn't be dismissive of whatever they're going to say. So listen very attentively and show some reasonable degree of empathy. But if it reaches a point like it reached with that particular individual, it became quite obvious that it was being used as a crutch, it was being used as an excuse. You've got work to do. A system has to function where you report upwards. And if you're not willing to report upwards, then there has to be consistency across the board. So every other staff member will say mental health, so I don't want to be asked why I didn't do or why I did. And everybody must be left to their own devices and must be trusted. No system functions like that. So you know what we did is you had to then think a little bit out of the box. So I made some mashwara with the Amir of HR in our organization. So he told me, Maulana, this lady, based on what you've explained, there's no point in arguing with her. She knows full well that it's not a mental health issue. She's using it as an excuse. So just tell her, sister, I'm very sympathetic. However, according to HR policy, if you no longer have the capacity to fulfill your function, then you cannot continue employment. So based on your own version of events, there's a lack of capacity. Therefore, what I need for you to do now is to formally put it down in writing that you no longer want to be asked any questions by your supervisor or to be critiqued in terms of the quality of your performance or to be rebuked if you fall short because it's impacting on your mental health. Put it in writing, get us a certificate from a qualified psychologist, and then we will submit it to HR to determine whether you still have the capacity to fulfill the job description for which you were employed. After that, no stories. No stories, because now the implication of what she was doing dawned upon her. But like I say, each situation would have its own dynamics. Amen. You had a question? No, good question. Jazakumullah for that. You're right. And when you're in the situation, then you're not functioning in a way where you can process things logically. I'll say something similar to what I said to Moana's question, that empathy. Because especially in our Indian community, right? And I'm just saying generally, maybe it's a little bit different, but my understanding is we kind of frown on these kind of things. Especially men. You know, that whole men don't cry thing. So, why is it he's going through this? He's just being lazy. He's being defeatist. He's being passive. He just needs to put himself up by the bootstraps. He needs a hard talking to, because that's how they were brought up. And in many ways, that's also how we were brought up. That's why I said you have to digest this for yourself firstly before you can articulate it. So empathy. The other aspect, and Jazakallah for the question, because I may have missed out in mentioning it, there is absolutely no harm in going for therapy and going for treatment based on all those principles that I have outlined. Like this, nobody stigmatizes going for chemo if you have cancer, or taking insulin if you have diabetes, or taking your pills if you have high blood pressure. So we got to destigmatize this. We've got to destigmatize this within our communities, that, you know what, men don't cry, or if you've got these issues, then it's a sign of weak faith. I think at that moment, you don't have to explain principles and concepts. You just got to convince them to go for the treatment. And then let the professionals take over. It's a science. And it requires a certain, not only formal skill set that, I got my degree in psychology or psychiatry, but it also requires a kind of set of informal skill set. You need to have a lot of patience to listen to people who are going through this kind of issue. You got to be able to decipher. It's key things here and there that just to you and I would sound like a routine comment, but when experts sit with them, they are able to pick up. So put them on the course of therapy, because if that talbina and tareed would have an impact on a grieving family, it's consumed, isn't it? So why can't you take medication? There should be no stigma. If somebody's got bipolar, then it's no one is saying don't go for chemo, because we never heard about Sahaba who suffered from cancer. Or we never heard about Sahaba who suffered from diabetes. Diabetes is a problem today because sugar has become inexpensive. As long as sugar was expensive, it was a rich man's disease, right? Now, whatever the cause may be, whether we're getting cancer because of the fertilizers that they're spraying on the crops, that is a different matter. The reality is you got cancer. Whether 1500 years ago cancer was a sickness or not, you've got it now. So what's the Islamic principle? The Islamic principle is that for every sickness there's a cure. So pursue the cure. Now, whether people previously had bipolar, didn't have bipolar, whether it was called something else, that's an academic debate. The reality is, if you've got bipolar, then we have to make people understand there should be no shame. Like that man who got diabetes, he takes his insulin sometimes in public also. At Ramadan time, you see some people that even on the iftar table, they're injecting themselves as soon as the time is set. I got diabetes now, that's life. I mean, there's no stigma to it, so we've got to destigmatize these things, and we've got to convince them that say, listen, you've got to go for treatment, and there's no harm, there's no Islamic barrier. Actually, Islam would encourage it. At times, Islam would say it's mandatory, it's compulsory, because by you not going for treatment, you're stunting your own capacity and ability, and you're making life difficult for everyone else. If you don't treat your high blood pressure, then you can't fast, right? And then you can't read your namaz properly. And then you can't do what you need to do. And at the same time, you're becoming a nuisance for your wife and for everyone else because of the consequences. So in that case, the scholars will say it's mandatory for you to take your medication for your high blood pressure, for your own good health and for everybody else. Similarly, when it comes to this, we've got to be able to convince them that there are experts who are trained to deal with this, and you've got to go. Then once they go there, then you just give backup support, and it's up to them. I'll just touch on that last part, right? I concur with all that you said, because there's educators, and I understand on the sister side also there's quite a few educators, that when we do workshops for Muslim schools back home, the one point I always mention is that later on in life, you won't remember the teacher that was the most educated or the most brilliant, or perhaps even had the best teaching skills. You'll remember the teacher that made you feel the most special. I mean, think about it, right? We kind of like all middle-aged people here in the main, in this room, some elderly. But how much are you going to remember of what your teacher actually taught you? 12 years of schooling, then you went his class, and you went maktab, and you went madrasa, darulum, then tertiary education. But if I just have to say now, think of a teacher. The teacher whose face or whose voice or whose name will pop in your mind, in all likelihood will be the one who made you feel special. Not the one who was most brilliant at the topic or had the best classroom technical abilities. So the point you make is a very valid one, that sometimes how we speak as imams and as parents and especially as teachers can compromise or can complement the mental health of a student or of a child in a very massive way. So culturally, we come from a background that you say no by default. I mean, I grew up knowing my father had to first say no before eventually he will say yes. It was just a thing, right? And a father had to be harsh by default, even if he was in a good mood. Sometimes he would scold us, and then as we were walking away with our backs turned to him, he would be laughing. And he would think we never heard him laughing, but that was, it's no right or wrong. It was a system that was used in that particular way. When I went to Hifz class, the ustad used to sometimes spank us with a smile on his face and say, "You never get for a long time, here's a top-up." So a couple of shots as a top-up. And he's smiling. You knew your sabak on that particular day. There was no issue. One is, he hits you when he's angry. And he was like, top-up. The mentality was that was the fuel, right? Now we know there's a whole different approach to it. So words can really make or break a person. That said, we've got to find some degree of balance, that you cannot, when I was speaking at a place where I was asked to speak about the youth, then I said that the default position was no, okay, in terms of our parents. Today, we've moved from one extreme to the other. There's overcorrection. The default position is yes. I need to have this dress, even if it's un-Islamic. I can't tell my daughter no. We need to go there. Okay. Yeah, other today's children, mana, they don't listen. What you're going to do? At least this evil, not that evil. So even as teachers or as imams, you understand that we may be a little bit towards the one side. We can't go too much towards the other side. We must be careful about overcorrecting. I want to say one more thing. Stop me if I'm talking too much. I talk by profession, right? So it's like a 3 hours program a day on the radio. I myself am of the view, and it doesn't necessarily have to be correct, that sometimes as ulama, so as an imam or as a teacher or whatever, we need to share a little bit to facilitate the process of destigmatization. I'll give you an example. There was a massive marriage conference before COVID in South Africa, and I did to do a segment on communication. And in that segment, communication in marriage, I spoke about that it's natural for men to cry, the same point I made here. And in the Q&A, one man stood up and said, "But Maulana, I doubt you cry." And I said, "I do." And there was like silence, right? Because these are people who knew me, who listened to me on the radio every day and all of this. You cry, because I come across like, in a very strong sense. And I said, "I do." There are times when I get so frustrated. There are times when I get so depressed over issues that are not working out. I don't show it publicly because it's counterproductive for me to show it publicly, but I do in my privacy cry at times, not all the time. So when I left there, it was not something planned that I intended to do. It happened in the moment. And I had this debate in my own mind, and then I spoke to friends, and was it right or wrong to share that? And the answer was that in that context, it was right to destigmatize the crying of men. But don't overshare, because nowadays you see some of these influencers, they're only talking about, yesterday this happened, then I did that. You're oversharing. So sometimes as an imam, as a teacher, or as a parent, show the human element. That will stimulate the process that, if my imam has got a bit of a mental issue, emotional, mental challenge, then it means I can also have it. And it means if he can go for therapy, then I also can go for therapy. If he can, remember, even psychologists go for what they call debriefs, right? Which is the form of therapy. That if you dealt with a very sensitive, intense case, you yourself must go to kind of flush the residue of those emotions out of your own system. So as an alim, sometimes you deal with social cases. You can't sleep at night. Now, if you acknowledge that, and you acknowledge that I also have to work through that, then it also helps with the destigmatization of it. But be careful about oversharing. Look, this is my view again, right? People are at liberty to agree or to differ. But what percentage of ulama who went into secular sciences actually ended up misguided? Minimal, I would think. I think, we mustn't exaggerate the fear in our minds. I remember that there was once a scholar that came to South Africa, and there were some controversies around some of his fiqh positions, not the aqidah matter. Yeah? So one alim gave him the podium to speak, and the other ulama criticized him. They said, he's going to misguide your congregation. So that alim smiled and he replied, and I've never forgotten this reply. He said, see, I'm the imam of my masjid for 30 years. If he can sway my congregation in one talk, then I haven't done my job for 30 years. So if we're so scared that by sending ulama into these fields of psychology, that they're going to become misguided, I'm not saying that that threat doesn't exist. It does, right? But then the deeper question is, then how solid is your own product? That who else must go then? Because if the alim, you don't want to send him into that environment to learn both, so that he can come and say, right, this is the balance. I'm giving you just a kind of broad outline because I'm not a psychologist. Had I been a psychologist, I may be able to maybe do it somewhat differently. I may be able to train in the more technical sense. So if we're not willing to have the confidence to send those people who spend 6-7 years in the environment of Qala Allah, Qala Rasul and say, listen, he'll go in there and he'll be able to withstand the ideological threats that are definitely there and come out and be an asset to the community, then who are we going to send? Boys and girls who have no background in Quran and Sunnah, then isn't that a greater threat? Because they're still going to carry Muslim names, and patients will still go to them and say, but this is a Muslim psychologist, a Muslim psychiatrist, and then get the wrong kind of therapy. So that's my humble thought. And I feel as ulama, we need to be speaking about this from the minbar, right? So these kind of thoughts. Actually, you may notice when I was flipping through these notes that it's a little bit colored and all of that. That's because, inshallah, I request to du'as that volume 2 of my book, In Pursuit of Purpose, the first volume was a compilation of lectures and presentations. This will be the opening chapter of the next book. So this is actually the version that I was proofreading for the book. And the reason I told them make this the opening chapter was exactly for this reason. To show the order of priority that we give to these particular aspects in terms of the modern discourse and the modern narrative. Because if we're not going to lead the discussion and give the Islamic perspective, we'll make some mistakes along the way. We may get ourselves embroiled in some confusion which needs to be clarified. Then who else? You had a... Preferably, like with everything else. So what is the masala about fasting in Ramadan? They say if a pious Muslim doctor says it's not in the interest of your physical health to fast, then you're exempt from fasting. Why is that qualification? Because the pious Muslim doctor will understand the importance of fasting, therefore will only make that recommendation if it's absolutely necessary, right? Whereas a non-Muslim doctor may just look at it very superficially. Don't fast because you've got diabetes. So don't fast, right? So you've got a 21-year-old who's got diabetes because his father and mother, it's a hereditary thing, and he's not fasting and smiling it away. Similarly, and especially more so because it's got to do with multiple aspects that pertain to the spiritual and pertain to the emotional, that we have to have Muslim psychologists, psychiatrists, Muslim people who can train educators, who can train people in this particular field so that they know what are the parameters that must not be breached. Mental zulm.
so clever in changing their ways and their talks and like the victim, they're like a victim as well. And I've been through all experience and after sorry for any people
Yeah.
down, could be any organization, could be a masjid, could be a madrasa, and it's really sad.
Subhanallah. It's just like with the medical issue. If there is no Muslim, you've got no option. But you've got to just try and look for the best of the rest, as they would say.
I think we should wrap up.
سبحان الله وبحمده سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله